And that is this sort of new progressive attempt to change the definition of words in order to achieve debate goals. In this case, we've seen on the left in the United States and over here, an attempt to define racism or to limit it to anti-Black racism, and to assert that that really is the prism through which all iniquity is seen, race and identity. And by that sort of, in that worldview, anti-Jewish racism, Jews are perceived as white, which in itself is a very contested and complex point to make, and quite a wrong one, quite self-evidently. But because this sort of black and white view of the world, as it were, is the prism through which she sees things, then that causes her to take part in this redefinition of words, by which the only solution to the debate is that it's all down to anti-Black racism. And so the implication of what she was saying was, this wasn't a race issue. Let's get back to the real problem, which is anti-Black racism, which seems to be this sort of myopic, obsessive focus on race and identity that has, gripped America in recent years.
Jake, we couldn't get the audio needle beyond the halfway mark, so we're going to bail out early. I do apologise. We'll try and get that problem fixed for the next time we chat. But thanks for now. Jake Wallace-Simons, editor of the Jewish Chronicle. Let's bring you up to date with the rest of the news headlines now with Miranda.
Thank you, Colin. It's 4:32. The top stories this hour. The Prime Minister has arrived in Ukraine to try to de-escalate tensions with Russia. Boris Johnson will speak to President Volodymyr Zelensky about finding a diplomatic solution. A call with Russia's President Vladimir Putin, which was due to be held yesterday, has been rescheduled for tomorrow afternoon. The public will be told if Boris Johnson is fined for breaching lockdown rules, Downing Street has confirmed. It follows Number 10 previously implying the information might not be disclosed, but we will hear more about that when the investigation with the Met Police is ready.
We've been asked to keep some sense of...
Scotland's First Minister says current COVID restrictions will remain in place for at least another 3 weeks. Speaking to MSPs earlier, Nicola Sturgeon says despite cases of the virus remaining high, recent data gives ground for optimism. Some of the current restrictions include face masks in schools, hybrid working and face coverings when using public transport and indoor public spaces. Around 1,600 Tesco staff are facing redundancy. The supermarket chain is going to stop replenishing stock overnight at dozens of stores, and some of its petrol stations will no longer be staffed out of hours. Tesco is also closing its Jack's discount shop, saying it wants to focus on its core business. More than 1 in 10 children are starting school in England without having had their measles, mumps and rubella jab. Take-up of the vaccine is at its lowest rate in a decade. The World Health Organization says 95% of children need to be vaccinated to keep measles at bay, but the current coverage for 2 doses of the MMR jab is around 85%. Well, on TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Brazier.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world. If
you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Well, time for our daily debate. Are you growing tired of Partygate, the scandal? Or is it a critical question which needs to be really unpacked and ventilated properly? Well, the cost of living crisis, conflict in Ukraine, are they getting drowned out? Well, a Boris loyalist MP told The Telegraph last night, quote, "People outside are sick of this. They want to move on. The Tories who are agitating are ex-ministers who want a job." Others have blamed the press and even claimed the scandal's being pushed by Remainers in an attempt to overthrow a pro-Brexit Prime Minister. We'll try and get both sides of this for you now. But first, some opinions from the streets of Manchester, where our reporter Bradley Harris has been gauging opinion today.
I think it's just another nail in the government's coffin that needs shaking up. It's unacceptable.
Do you think the Prime Minister is being treated fairly at the moment?
No.
Why is that?
Well, he just needs sacking. Or he should have resigned months ago. He's out of his depth, so...
Well, it's a double-edged sword because, in some respects, he didn't sign up for any of this. In between, he's had a couple of kids. He's managed to get through the Brexit thing and through the COVID thing, and I think he's done very well about that. But at the same time, he's let himself down making rules. You know, you make a rule, you stick to the rule. Everybody sticks to it, you're supposed to, anyway.
I think the public have the right to know what was found in that report, and it should be discussed. He is in charge of the government, and at the end of the day it falls on his head. Yes, I think they've done good things with the vaccine, but that's not just him, that's other people under him, and I think, you know, they've made mistakes, there's been mistakes in his party, and yeah, I do think he should resign.
I think he needs to answer for all the disinformation that he's given to us, and he hasn't got integrity anymore, and he's paid to do a job, and part of that job is to have integrity and values. So no, I think he needs to go.
So our debate then, are you tired of Partygate? Is it time to move on and talk about other things that are potentially more important? We've already got Kate Hoey, Baroness Hoey, alongside us here, joined now by Joseph Robertson, who's a research fellow at the Bow Group. Joseph, thanks for joining us, appreciate it. Kate, if I can start with you. Sometimes Vox Pops are a waste of time. Occasionally they elicit a grain of prevailing wisdom from the masses, the wisdom of crowds, we call it, don't we? And I thought that second Vox there, somebody saying, let's give this a sense of proportion. Yes, he's made mistakes, but actually, in the scheme of things, I remember what he did for Brexit more than anything else. That mattered to me the most.
And we have to remember that he got elected with an 80-seat majority on a very straight platform. I think my criticism of Boris is more that he's not getting on with doing the things that we promised in that election that they would do.
He's had COVID.
Yeah, and the COVID has been a huge barrier to that. But I do believe that, you know, once the Sue Gray report was set up, why did we then need 2 weeks of constant media reporting of every, you know, tittle-tattle from any MP? And watching yesterday, again, it was very interesting that it was how many of the MPs who actually spoke out at the beginning and get called because they're more senior were people who had lost their jobs, were people who were ex-ministers, were people who were disgruntled about overseas aid being cut. And I do think...
This happens when governments get tired, though, doesn't it? When
yes, but I mean, this government hasn't really had the chance, apart from showing that they could get the vaccination programme going in terms of COVID, to be able to get on with the job, which is why probably the Prime Minister wants to go to Ukraine today and be seen to do that. And of course, my view is we should be, I mean, if he would come out tomorrow and actually say to the European Union, sorry, but the protocol's not working in Northern Ireland, we're going to get rid of it, and, you know, take the consequences of the EU being angry, then frankly, he would win back a lot of support in those red wall seats that he needs to keep to hold on to power next time.
Joseph, can you understand when we show our viewers the press conference from Kiev, Prime Minister in Ukraine talking about important foreign policy matters, we will have viewers who will be shouting at the telly when the assembled press corps who followed the Prime Minister from Westminster start asking about parties, not about Russian military expansionism?
Yeah. I mean, there's two problems there. One, if you don't want parties to be talked about, don't have parties. I think the reality is that when a scandal is created, it's unavoidable. So if it takes precedence over something even more important, that's just what happens when things snowball. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to draw attention to that. I think Ukraine is certainly in a serious situation, but Kiev has downplayed the reports that we've been seeing, that things need to escalate quite as quickly perhaps as they are. So I think the Prime Minister is using some diversion tactics there just to sort of brush over what's happening at home. And I think Partygate does deserve a place in the media. Perhaps it doesn't need all the attention it's been getting.
It's the day after day element of it. I mean,
Yeah.
OK, so in terms of...
What should he be doing then? If he's not going to Ukraine, what should he be doing? If he goes to visit a hospital, it'll be a diversion. Anything he does, you're basically saying he's diverting. He is the Prime Minister still, whether people like it or not.
Yeah.
And he should be getting on with the job.
He has to carry on with the day-to-day, but then the reality is he hasn't been doing that for a long time. So I think what people are tired of is the fact that he's using that now to kind of cover up something that should be addressed immediately. I think he could have been a lot more honest, perhaps, and maybe solved a lot of issues by speaking out a lot earlier.
Yeah, well, I agree with you on that, and that's what Sue Gray says. I mean, it's handled badly. The whole thing has been handled badly from day one. And if there had been more openness and transparency, I think people would have been, it would have been quietened much more quickly. I mean, people forget that Downing Street is a huge building with loads of people. And it's the idea that somehow during the lockdown, that building was empty, there was nobody working. Of course they were all working, they were all in there, they were mixing anyway during the day. And this idea of it being a party, you know, I mean, yes, there was one example of that, I think, which the Prime Minister was at Chequers, so he can't be blamed for that. And are we really saying the Prime Minister is responsible for every single person's behaviour in Downing Street? Sue Gray is quite right. The whole system needs looking at. And the senior civil servant and the senior civil servant who sent out emails like that asking people to bring their own booze and so on, I mean, that to me is where the responsibility lies.
Sure, I just don't think it can be brushed under the carpet.
No, I don't want to brush it under the carpet, but I just think we're taking...
Can I indulge in a little bit of media navel-gazing? And I say this in light of the fact that we saw a tweet 1 hour ago now from Peter Aldous MP, who writes, after a great deal of soul-searching, I have reached the conclusion that the Prime Minister should resign. So another Conservative backbencher is writing to the chair of the 1922 committee saying the Prime Minister should face a leadership challenge. But that, Joseph, is the only point of substance moving this story on today. And I would submit to you that alone is not enough for this story to be leading the bulletins on the BBC 6 o'clock news, which it will do. Yeah.
I mean, the reality is that in the myriad number of points that the Prime Minister's dropped since 2020, I think it's about 35, 40 points. The reality is that only a quarter of that has come after Partygate, which is a large percentage in terms of an immediate sort of turn-up. But I think the reality is, as you were saying, he needs to be addressing the issues that he hasn't been addressing up to now. This is kind of a lot of anger, I think, being directed from the public and coming out through the media. This is why the story is perpetuating, because everything else is being viewed through this lens. So it becomes a case of the fact that he's been to the left of Blair on a lot of policies over the last few years. This is the culmination of that. It's showing that the Tory government is not Tory and cannot lead. I think that's the problem.
I think there's some truth in that, but then also you have to remember that there are a lot of people in there who genuinely dislike Boris because he campaigned to leave the European Union. He won the referendum. He then went on to win an election to get Brexit done, which not been quite done because Northern Ireland hasn't been sorted out. But, you know, there are people in there who really are just loving the fact that now they can payback time for Brexit. Not everything, and the public isn't like that either. I think the public genuinely, those who are feeling very angry, are angry for...
But just on Joe's point, that the Prime Minister's personal approval rating has dropped by, I mean, that's a precipitous decline in his personal popularity. And you must be worried as somebody who, I have no idea, but I imagine you lost, if not friends, then former political allies for your stance, your brave stance on Brexit. And there are people who look at Keir Starmer and remember him advocating for a second referendum and fear that lose Boris, you lose Brexit. Now, that, I have to say, to me, that feels pretty overblown, but there are people who are saying that.
Oh, well, yes, and you just have to listen to people, dare I say it, like Mr. Heseltine being brought back to talk about how, you know, we need another referendum. And, you know, very interesting, yesterday somebody was tweeting the Keir Starmer interview not that long ago, 2019, where he said, we are going to campaign to remain, and we will campaign to stay and to have another referendum. So I'm afraid, I am very keen to keep a Prime Minister that I believe genuinely wants to see us make a success of leaving the European Union. And I'm not quite sure who can do that anyway. If Boris did go, who really is the person? Because I'm not a member of the Conservative Party.
I think there's two ways to look at that. If Boris wants to stay and wants to show a willingness to actually fulfil Brexit all the way through to its true potential, he's going to have to engage with the backbenchers who were, you know, a key part to Brexit. He's going to have to get a gold standard Conservative leading the charge from Downing Street, Sir John Redwood, Sir John Hayes, somebody who really knows this stuff and can actually give back credibility to the membership base, because that's where he's losing massive support. And in terms of a natural leader to follow, I agree. I think that you have to look to the backbenchers once again, or look to one of the junior ministers, perhaps, you know, even Sir Graham himself might be considering a run, somebody like that who's actually going to really lead the charge, and that's not in place yet. The reality is Boris is either going to lose in the polls further, or he's going to lose in an election if he keeps on going.
I wouldn't underestimate the chat. If we can, you know, if he gets through this next few weeks and the police report doesn't say anything that's particularly damning, and after all, Tony Blair was interviewed too, so that's nothing new for prime ministers. Then I don't underestimate his ability to come back and get those poll ratings way up again.
Never overestimate the ability of people.
Overestimate, is that? Yeah.
Kate Hoey, I know you stayed with us, but Joe Robertson, really appreciate you coming in. Thanks very much indeed.
Cheers.
In around about 12 minutes' time, the timing slipped horribly yesterday, but in around about 10 or so minutes' time, the Prime Minister in Kiev addressing the problems facing Ukraine and what the UK can do to help Eastern European countries as there appears to be this military build-up of Russian forces. We'll be listening to what the Prime Minister's got to say, and also how much he's got to say about Partygate if questions are directed towards him on that topic, as there almost certainly will be. In the meantime, though, it's time for the weather.
Hello again. Although we've seen some brighter skies, even some sunshine in places today, it will increasingly turn cloudy in the west, with some rain and drizzle, especially in the north by the end of the day. And it's blustery in the north. You can see the tightly packed isobars there as low pressure moves into Scandinavia. High pressure still to the southwest, in between a weather front which has cleared to the south for some time to allow those brighter skies. It's pushing back further east as we head through this evening and overnight. So that will build the cloud across western parts of the country, some hill fog over Wales, northwest England, Northern Ireland, western Scotland, and it's across western and southern Scotland, northern England, and Northern Ireland for a time that we'll see some outbreaks of mainly light rain and drizzle. We keep the showers going in the far north across Shetland with some sleet and snow here, but further south with the cloudy skies, it's largely a dry night but a mild night, and a bright enough start to the day on Wednesday. Actually, some decent sunny spells coming through. It's across central and southern England where we'll see the best of the sunshine on Wednesday afternoon, whilst further north, generally cloudy with those outbreaks of mainly light rain and drizzle, especially for the Pennines, the Highlands and Grampians, southern uplands. But for many, it's a generally settled afternoon, and with the sunshine in the south, with lighter winds, feeling pleasant enough. The cloud will continue to feed in from the west and southwest overnight into the start of Thursday. Some heavier pulses of rain moving into central and western Scotland, the Northern Isles as well. Otherwise, the rain fairly bitty. generally showery in nature, but with the cloud cover and the breeze coming from the southwest, it's another mild night, so staying largely frost-free for the start of Thursday. Again, a lot of cloud in the sky for Thursday morning. Some breaks developing, particularly across the Midlands, East Anglia and southern England. Otherwise, it's going to turn increasingly wet as we end Thursday towards the northwest of the UK. That rain clearing to sunny spells and blustery showers on Friday.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world. If
you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farrar, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no line on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Well, Boris Johnson may be short of support in certain quarters, but he's not short of coverage this time. Yesterday, we saw him on his feet for the best part of an hour and 3/4 at Westminster, addressing questions in the wake of the Sue Gray report, the 12 pages, which for some people was a little bit too pithy. I'll explain what you're looking at now. You will be shortly seeing the Prime Minister again today. You can see the Union flag there, flanked by the Ukrainian flag. We are not in control of these pictures. I'm not entirely sure the camera operator is either. Kate Hoey, Baroness Hoey is... she seems to be focusing on somebody's midriff there, for heaven's sake. Kate Hoey's alongside me. As soon as there's something to see worth watching from Kiev, we will have a look at that. I'm looking, Kate Hoey, at a poll that we have taken. It's not many people voting at this stage, but what is striking to me is the proportions of how it's breaking down. The question is simply, can the Conservatives recover in the polls with Boris Johnson as Prime Minister? 2/3 of people suggest he can recover in the polls. I make the point that people are quite fickle, memories are short, particularly when it comes to political scandal. Others will say, no, on this one, when there's, I hate to use the phrase cut through, but when there's been this much cut through, when people all have their own stories about things that they personally had to forego during lockdown, that it's so deeply embedded, it's so deeply personal, that they will not forgive the Prime Minister for this.
Well, time will tell, but it's interesting that it depends where you poll to. I mean, there's no doubt about it, the further you get away from London, the more people, and the more you go away from sort of metropolitan cities, even the centre of Manchester and so on, that you find people who see things slightly differently.
What are their priorities? What are they worried about right now?
Well, I think at the moment, the most important thing is they're very worried about the increase in national insurance, because that's going to affect the cost of living generally, the whole way that things seem to be going up and up and up. And I think also there's beginning to be a debate, and I think it's a really good debate that needs to happen, on why we're paying so much costs for energy, and whether the whole green agenda, which I'm afraid the Prime Minister has pushed so hard, and that is something that wasn't, in the manifesto as the #1 priority, and yet that seems to have taken over the whole idea that of net zero. And people need to understand what net zero means. And I think that's going to be a debate over the next year, very much because people are going to realise it's affecting them. I think that's what they're interested in. Their own. Most people just want to get on with their life and live well, know that they're secure, they feel their job's secure. That's important too. And those are all things that ultimately should be the government priority, apart from the security of the country.
If you are just switching on, we're waiting for the Prime Minister to address the cameras in Ukraine, in Kiev. He's going to be talking about the military situation there, but also we'll be answering, you're fairly certain, some more questions about Partygate. Baroness Hoey, Kate Hoey's alongside me, reflecting on what's likely to be coming up. I just wonder, Kate Hoey, as a prominent Brexiteer, who bears the scars for that, I'm sure. There was a time, wasn't there, with Boris Johnson, after he became Conservative leader, when he just had this Midas touch, and he seemed to have this almost supernatural ability to make the right calls, ruthlessly and brutal at times, getting rid of those Tory rebels, squashing them. That went down really well. He neutered the threat from UKIP. He just seemed to lead this charmed life. He made all the right calls. Was it because he was being advised by Dominic Cummings, or has he just lost something?
Well, I think he was very, very energised by the whole Brexit campaign, and he let's not forget, he really enjoys being out there talking to people. I mean, I worked with him as a sports commissioner in London when he was the mayor for 8 years, and that he really loved to get out there and do things with people, which is why he gets stuck on wires and things like that. But there's no doubt about it. I think he nearly died, and I know that people hate people saying that because they think it's an excuse. But he did go through a very, very traumatic experience, and I kind of felt that after that he wasn't quite the same for a while.
Sitting in your chair yesterday, we had Michael Portillo, former Defence Secretary, who didn't get the story out, but we talked about it during the commercial break, and he said when he was Defence Secretary, journalist Boris Johnson came to interview him, and he turned up 45 minutes late. Michael Portillo said, "Boris, why are you 45 minutes late?" Boris Johnson replied, "I didn't know where the Ministry of Defence was."
That is so... Well, no, I mean...
Do you believe that? I mean, but, it tells a story about...
Yeah,
something.
Well, you see, he needs very good people around him. And I have to say, he had very good people around him at City Hall who knew his faults, who knew how to handle him, who knew how to get the best out of him. And then he lost a lot of people. And that's why I think the whole Downing Street thing is not just about, which we said earlier, about civil servants, but actually looking at who is giving him his advice. Who decided yesterday that he couldn't say in the statement, for example, yes, I will make this report public. And if there was a legal reason why it couldn't, he should have said that, and then later on he rode back on that. So I think there needs to be a real shake-up at Downing Street if he's going to come through this well.
Let's just see if we can have a look at that picture from Kiev again, the podium shot showing the flags of the... Oh. There you go, it's settled down a little bit now from that previous giddiness. As we look at those pictures, Kate Hoey, let's just reflect on the fact that, Liz Truss, Foreign Secretary, has been dealing with Ukraine a lot. Is she a potential contender? Others say no. Priti Patel might be the holder of the true flame for the Thatcherites and those who want a bit of red meat. What say you?
Well, I would say I hope Liz Truss recovers quickly. She's at home with COVID and, of course, wasn't able to go to Ukraine with the Prime Minister, and I'm sure she's quite disappointed in that. I really don't know what's going on inside in terms of who's going to be, but I think there'll be a lot of people thinking about it now. But having said that, the Cabinet have all come out very strongly in support of the Prime Minister, and I don't think any of them are going to break rank at this stage to ditch him just because they think it might help their leadership bid.
Do you mind if we just ditch domestic politics for a second? We're coming up to 5 o'clock, and I'll do a time check when we get there, but I think we ought to, at some point, just reflect the reason the Prime Minister is there right now. He's there to talk about Ukraine, he's there to talk about NATO, he's there to talk about Ukraine, not Partygate. It's 5 o'clock. And that's where we go. Let's go back to Ukraine. Let's show you the flags. Let's show you the podiums. Let's show you the journalists who've assembled to press the Prime Minister on Britain's foreign policy response to what's happening on the borders of Ukraine, but also what's happening in the UK as well in terms of domestic politics. I wouldn't say that's about to start in the next couple of minutes. No. I've been proven wrong before. Kate Hoey, Baroness Hoey, is alongside me here just to reflect on what we are likely to see. And Kate Hoey, I'm making the point, trying to get to the point that actually there is a bigger diplomatic game here. Let's just talk about Russia. Are you one of those people who feels that Russia poses a threat?
Well, clearly Russia are trying to provoke as much antagonism and anger as possible, and they're doing that for a reason. And they want to make the West do things that they can then use against them. I genuinely don't think that we'll see an invasion of Ukraine in the immediate future. Certainly won't see it till after the Winter Olympics, because they're not going to upset China, who are very keen for their Olympics that are starting soon in the next few days. And I don't think there'll ever be a full invasion. I think what they might try and do is go in little bits where there are very large numbers of Russian-speaking people on the edges of the border. And how the West, I think what's good is that we have been seen in the United Kingdom as prepared to speak out and stand up, whereas some of the other EU countries have not actually. Germany, for example, has been, I think, very reticent to really speak out about what's doing, because they're worried about their oil.
Well, and their gas that they'd like to see more of, and cheaply, comes back to your point, Kate Hoey, about the fact that people are seeing their energy bills rising. It's all sort of linked. We're going to try and get a news bulletin away before we go back to Ukraine for the Prime Minister. Miranda's got that for you now.
Thank you, Colin. It's 5:02. The top stories from the GB newsroom. And the Prime Minister is about to hold a joint news conference with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky amid efforts to find a diplomatic solution to current tensions with Russia. A call with Russia's President Vladimir Putin, which was due to be held yesterday, has been rescheduled for tomorrow afternoon. Samantha de Bendern from the Institute of International Affairs says there is still hope for a peaceful resolution.
Diplomacy is continuing, so that is always a good sign. And you have to remember that Putin actually has a lot to lose. And I think that the plans that Liz Truss unveiled yesterday to say that Russian oligarchs in Putin's close circle will be targeted have shown a very, very strong resolve to explain to Putin that the consequences for him personally could be rather dramatic.
The public will be told if Boris Johnson is fined for breaching lockdown rules, Downing Street has confirmed. It follows Number 10 previously implying the information might not be disclosed, saying it was a matter for the Met Police. The Prime Minister has apologised after the Sue Gray report found failures of leadership and judgment. He says an updated version of the inquiry will be published after the police investigation is completed. Conservative MP Andrew Bridgen told GB News the buck stops with the Prime Minister.
We've got a concession from the Prime Minister that he will release the Sue Gray report unredacted in full. All we've seen is 12 pages of filleted report, but that was actually damning enough. Serious misjudgments and leadership across Number 10 and the Cabinet Office, widening the blame, never mentioning the Prime Minister, but ultimately he sets the culture in Number 10 and the government.
Well, meanwhile, Downing Street says the Prime Minister stands by his comments in the Commons yesterday about Sir Keir Starmer's record as a prosecutor.
Leader of the opposition, a former Director of Public Prosecutions, Mr. Speaker, so he spent most of his time prosecuting journalists and failing to prosecute Jimmy Savile, as far as I can make out.
Well, the Labour leader says he claims he failed to prosecute the notorious sex offender are false. Sir Keir was Director of Public Prosecutions at the time, but he was not directly involved in the case. The House of Commons Speaker says he's far from satisfied that the Prime Minister's comments were appropriate. Scotland's First Minister says current COVID restrictions will remain in place for at least another 3 weeks. Speaking to MSPs earlier, Nicola Sturgeon says despite cases of the virus remaining high, recent data gives ground for optimism. The current restrictions include face masks in schools, hybrid working from home, and face coverings when using public transport and indoor public spaces. A man who killed his ex-girlfriend and her autistic son before going on the run has been convicted of their murders. Daniel Bolton walked from Skegness to Louth in Lincolnshire to kill Bethany Vincent and her 9-year-old son Darren Henson in May last year. He then led police on a 24-hour manhunt. Jurors dismissed the 30-year-old's claim of being on autopilot at the time of the murders. He'll be sentenced at Lincoln Crown Court tomorrow. A driver who used his car to stop a knife man as he stabbed a woman in London has been released without charge. Met Police say the motorist, who's known as Abraham, has been released after officers reviewed the law around self-defence and defence of another. They say they consider the 26-year-old a vital witness rather than a suspect. More than 1 in 10 children are starting school in England without having had their measles, mumps or rubella jab. Take-up of the vaccine is at its lowest rate in a decade. The World Health Organization says 95% of children need to be vaccinated to keep measles at bay, but the current coverage for 2 doses of the MMR jab is around 85%. Dr. Sarah Kayat says even a small drop in vaccine take-up can cause problems.
We know that even small insults in that level can result in outbreaks on a population level. And I think with COVID restrictions coming down, travel becoming more popular again, we have to remember that there may be travel from more endemic areas where you know, measles is more endemic, and that will mean outbreaks will start happening.
Well, you're up to date. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's get back to Brazier.
Well, he's running late, the Prime Minister. He was due to be at that podium in Kiev, flanked by the Ukrainian President at 5 o'clock sharp. It's not happened. Usual reasons, who knows? We probably never find out what's happened. Talks overrunning, talks starting too late, who knows? But as soon as the Prime Minister appears at that podium, we will take you over there live, and we'll take the questions as well from the journalists who have travelled with the Prime Minister as part of his travelling press corps from London to Ukraine today. Just want to reflect on another story that we touched on yesterday, but we'd like to do a bit more on today, and that is about mandatory vaccines for NHS and social care workers. We think the mandatory ruling is set to be scrapped. That was the announcement yesterday from the Health Secretary Sajid Javid. The decision to consult on ending the policy coming amid warnings of staff shortages if the plan were imposed on those NHS workers. Let's turn to a midwife, Erica Thompson, who's taken a strong view on this. Erica, welcome to you. Are you one of those who were relieved to hear what Sajid Javid was announcing yesterday? There would be a period of consultation, and the, I suppose, what we could probably call P45s that were going to be handed out on April the 1st, we presume now, will not be handed out.
Yes, I mean, we're obviously feeling pleased that he has revoked the mandatory element of the vaccine. But if I'm more honest, in the groups that I'm in, there's not a sense of jubilance and happiness. We're obviously relieved that in April, the NHS is not going to have a mass exodus of staff, which will obviously keep the patients safe. But we feel that Sajid Javid has made this decision based for the wrong reasons. He didn't talk about the ethics and the morals of the decision around mandating vaccines. And we feel that the government and our trusts and our unions have forgotten that the core principles of our healthcare is that we do not coerce and force people to have a drug. And so generally, we're feeling a little bit despondent with that. It also seems to be that it wasn't entirely revoked completely. So although it's been taken out of legislation, which we are exceptionally happy about, he's also given himself a caveat where he said that he could reassess it at any time. And together with the legislation being, consulted on the Human Rights Act at the moment, that's quite worrying. So the Human Rights Act legislation is being consulted, and it seems to be that they want to make changes that mean that the individual's rights are outweighed by the masses' rights. And so all in all, it's a little bit concerning.
Erica, I just wonder whether you think this was tactical all along, whether it was always the intention of the Department of Health to push people to have the gun pointed to their head when it comes to mandatory vaccinations, but always in the knowledge that if they couldn't get the numbers right down, and they didn't get the numbers down to, what was it, 77,000 NHS workers, 6% of the entire NHS workforce are unjabbed, and they couldn't, at the stroke of a pen on April the 1st, simply dismiss that substantial number of workers without the NHS being crippled by it, really. I just wonder whether you feel this was always their intention. They'd make the threat, but then withdraw it at the 11th hour.
Well, there is a technique called the nudge technique, where if you tell somebody you're going to take something away from them, you're more compelled to do the thing that you're being asked to do. And that has crossed our minds, yes, that it was used as a nudge technique. But what I don't think he anticipated was that the healthcare professionals, day in, day out, we are evaluating research. We are looking at the pros and the cons and making decisions with our patients about their care. So, of course, we're going to do the same for ourselves.
Erica, I just wondered on this programme, I've talked to a couple of doctors. Kate Goodman was one, Steve James, who you'll remember, many of our viewers will remember that scene of him confronting the health secretary at King's College on the wards, anaesthetist. And what characterised both of their approaches, and if you don't mind me saying approaches, it's also what we're seeing from you tonight, is a reasonableness and a clear-eyed sense of what's at stake morally, actually. I mean, there is a moral dimension, as you make clear to this, that it's about an individual's right to say, actually, I decide what goes into my body, not you. However, I'm sure you have colleagues, friends, family, who knows, who will say to you, you may not be, and I don't know what your circumstances are, Eric, I don't know whether you're jabbed or not, but, you know, if someone like Kate Goodman worked on a COVID ward, hadn't been jabbed, said, actually, the fact I've not been jabbed doesn't alter the fact I may or may not be any more transmissible. But some people say if you're not jabbed, you may be carrying it asymptomatically. And that's a risk that other people have to shoulder, not you.
Obviously, that's an argument that's been put forward, and that's an argument that Sajid Javid is still saying. But there is lots of evidence published in journals like The Lancet, and more evidence in the government's own technical briefings, which is showing that transmissibility between vaccinated and vaccine-free people is exactly the same. And so having I liken it to, if I was to wear a life jacket, then that wouldn't stop you from drowning. So, but your life jacket, that will help you stop drowning. So me being vaccinated, I've considered it very carefully. It doesn't affect the people that I'm around and the public that I'm working with.
Yeah. Erica Thompson, just hold there if you would for a second. We're waiting on the Prime Minister in a faraway country to tell us about what's happening there. But Kate Hoey's alongside me here, and I'm just wondering if she's got any thoughts that she wants to share with Erica.
Well, I mean, I would say to Erica and particularly the doctor who was at King's, just how commendable I think they've been, that they've been able to come out and actually take on what was the establishment medical position on this and do it in a way that made an awful lot of people actually think about it. Now, I've been vaccinated, double vaccinated, and very keen to have got my booster and all of that, but I still genuinely recognised your right and anybody's right to say what's going into their body. And I think what happened was that we were all swept along by this. Vaccination was the answer, and people didn't really look at the sort of science behind what you've just been saying about how you can carry on working and not be infecting, transmitting to someone else. So I'm genuinely pleased that the government looks like it's changed its mind. I mean, I suppose in a way I don't really care whether they've done it for the, said the right thing or not. And you're probably right. They haven't made any moral argument about it. And they're basically using the staffing issue as the reason. It's still the right result, and I still think deep down, probably many of them think that they've...
Erica, can I just ask you one final question before we go? And it's this. I know I've seen a couple of emails from people who've written into us here saying, it's wonderful that people like you and Kate Goodman and Steve James, I mentioned them already, were able to make this pitch. But you're highly networked people, you've well organised, you're motivated. What about the care home workers who perhaps didn't have some of those networks? A lot of them may be foreign workers as well, and a lot of them have lost their jobs already. What do we say to them?
Well, I was hoping Sajid Javid would say sorry yesterday, and he was pressed to say sorry by one of his parliamentarians, but he didn't. They asked if the care workers would be compensated and have back pay, and he ignored the question. And I think that is just a total disrespect to the work that those care workers put in throughout the whole pandemic. I know somebody personally who left because they didn't want to be vaccinated. They've been working in care for 19 years, and she absolutely... It broke her heart. It absolutely broke her heart to leave the people that she's been caring for. She found that she couldn't maintain her mortgage and her feeding her family, and so she went back and was coerced into having the first vaccination. And to me, that is barbaric, that we are putting things into people's bodies knowing that they don't want it. I think Sajid Javid owes them an apology, because the work that they do is immeasurable. You just can't say how much they do.
Erica Thompson, it's been terrific talking to you, but I just want to put one point to you, and I know other people will put this point to you, and I know that we'll get correspondents writing in asking the question. As a midwife, what do you get patients? Do you get mothers who are going to be coming in, they're going to be in labour, they're in labour already, who want to know? Does it never crop up at all? People have got other things in their mind, haven't they, by the time they've reached you? But I just wonder whether anybody's turned to you and said, well, why on earth haven't you been vaccinated?
No, honestly, they're not bothered. And I think that's because they've taken the vaccine for themselves, and they know that that's protection for them. They would much rather have a midwife in attendance with them than no midwife at all. But in all honesty, they don't ask me. The only time the conversation comes up is when I'm talking to somebody in an antenatal period, and we're weighing up the decision for them as to whether they want to take it for themselves. And then they might ask me, what did you do? In which case my answer would be, that's not, it's not really part of this discussion. What I did is weighed up all the evidence and made the decision for myself, and then I helped them make the right decision for them.
Well, Erica Thompson, as you make clear, and we made clear in our introduction, it is still at the consultation stage, but you've sensed the direction of travel from, I think, what was it at first Sajid Javid said at the weekend, we're going to pause and reflect, that was the word, wasn't it? Reflect on this. Now they're consulting on it. It feels like you're seeing the swoop of a U-turn, and in part that will be down to the work of people like you who've pushed for this. So, Erica Thompson, thanks so much for your time. Thanks very much indeed. Let's, if we can, again, show you the reason we're here this afternoon, and that's this. In Kiev, the podiums are set up. More journalists now in attendance than there were. It's the Ukrainian flag alongside the Union flag. The journalists there from Ukraine and from the travelling press corps from number 10, there to see Boris Johnson and what he has to say about the situation in Ukraine, and probably answer some questions about some of his troubles and woes back home as well. As you look at those pictures, just got time now for the weather.
Hello again. Although we've seen some brighter skies, even some sunshine in places today, it will increasingly turn cloudy in the west with some rain and drizzle, especially in the north by the end of the day. And it's blustery in the north. You can see the tightly packed isobars there as low pressure moves into Scandinavia. High pressure still to the southwest, in between a weather front which has cleared to the south for some time to allow those brighter skies. It's pushing back further east as we head through this evening and overnight. So that will build the cloud across western parts of the country, some hill fog over Wales, northwest England, Northern Ireland, western Scotland, and it's across western and southern Scotland, northern England and Northern Ireland for a time that we'll see some outbreaks of mainly light rain and drizzle. We keep the showers going in the far north across Shetland with some sleet and snow here, but further south with the cloudy skies, it's largely a dry night but a mild night and a bright enough start to the day on Wednesday. Actually, some decent sunny spells coming through. It's across central and southern England where we'll see the best of the sunshine on Wednesday afternoon, whilst further north, generally cloudy with those outbreaks of mainly light rain and drizzle, especially for the Pennines, the Highlands and Grampians, southern uplands. But for many, it's a generally settled afternoon and with the sunshine in the south, with lighter winds, feeling pleasant enough. The cloud will continue to feed in from the west and southwest overnight into the start of Thursday. Some heavier pulses of rain moving into central and western Scotland, the Northern Isles as well. Otherwise, the rain fairly bitty, generally showery in nature, but with the cloud cover and the breeze coming from the southwest, it's another mild night, so staying largely frost-free for the start of Thursday. Again, a lot of cloud in the sky for Thursday morning. Some breaks developing, particularly across the Midlands, East Anglia and southern England. Otherwise, it's going to turn increasingly wet as we end Thursday towards the northwest of the UK. That rain clearing to sunny spells and blustery showers on Friday.
Join me, Gloria De Piero, Monday to Thursday at noon for The Briefing. We go to the parts of Parliament that you won't see elsewhere. Plus, there's exclusive interviews with MPs from all parties.
But quite often, they paper over the real truth. Why does a working class lad like you join the Tories?
That's a good question.
Don't miss it. Monday to Thursdays at noon on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Let's show you the live pictures or the live scene from Kiev. The Prime Minister is expected, our Prime Minister, to appear at that podium. The journalists who've been gathering there look a little more intent, showing a bit more intent than they did a while ago. So that may herald the arrival of the Prime Minister. As soon as we see hide and hair of him, we'll take you to Kiev and listen to what he's got to say. In the meantime, here's a question. Should Spotify, the largest music streaming platform in the world, censor or take down the Joe Rogan podcast because of so-called COVID misinformation? It is the most popular podcast in the world, this, and its host has expressed some scepticism about the mass vaccinations of non-vulnerable groups. So it ought to be stressed that Joe Rogan, I think, describes as sensible, scientifically sensible vaccine. So he's not anti-vax in any way. Neil Young, Joni Mitchell, a number of other musicians and artists, as well as, I'm not sure it's fair to describe Prince Harry as an artist, but Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have all called for Spotify to act. And Rogan's responded by saying he'll aim to speak to COVID experts with a wider range of views, as well as admitting he, quotes, gets things wrong. Sometimes, well, here is part of that.
My pledge to you is that I will do my best to try to balance out these more controversial viewpoints with other people's perspectives so we can maybe find a better point of view. I don't want to just show the contrary opinion to what the narrative is. I want to show all kinds of opinions so that we can all figure out what's going on, and not just about COVID, about everything.
We were going to talk to somebody from Parler about the free speech implications of that, but I think we can see the Prime Minister in Kiev. Whether we can hear from him, that may be a different question. Let's see how the land lies in Ukraine. President Zelensky. We'll just wait to see whether there's a translation on this audio feed.
Ставши прем'єр-міністр, відбуваються непрості часи історичних викликів для нашої держави, Об'єднаного Королівства, Європи. Я впевнений, що не перебільшую для усього світу.
Kate Hoey, Baroness Hoey's alongside me. How's your Ukrainian? Rusty?
Yeah, rusty. I don't think I could quite decipher it. But it's interesting when it's being done by the country. We can do nothing about it.
We can do nothing about it. As soon as we're going to have one of those sort of choppy bits of television for the next 10 minutes, where as soon as we see Boris, we'll chop back to Boris when it's in Ukrainian. We'll probably just stick to another story, and that story is the Spotify story and Joe Rogan. Have you heard of Joe Rogan before, by the way? No,
sort of vague, but no. And I know nothing about Spotify. I'm sorry.
Well, we've got somebody who can explain. That's Amy Peikoff, who's Chief Policy Officer at the free speech social media platform Parler, also a writer and a philosopher as well. Amy, I hope you can hear us and join us from wherever you are. But if you can, thanks for joining us. We don't think of Spotify as being in the trenches of the culture wars, but they seem to be now.
Yeah, boy, there's a lot of talk about them. Last thing I heard now is that Graham Nash has also joined the exodus. It's actually a kind of slow trickle of artists from Spotify. But as to the question that you started off with, absolutely they should not try to censor Joe Rogan in any way. I actually don't think that they should even label, which is what they've agreed to do now. What we have today that we've seen increasingly is that we have a number of very powerful entities working together to control a narrative around COVID policy. And that's, of course, big government, but also the mainstream media. We see big pharma working also then with the big tech platforms. And that narrative has gone largely unchallenged, except for somebody like a Rogan, who has this very popular podcast. And then suddenly the focus turns to him and they try to control that as well. But as Rogan said in that long statement that you played part of, there have been a number of times where this narrative and what they've labeled as misinformation has been entirely incorrect. So whereas if you had talked about the possible lab leak origins of COVID-19, that would have gotten you banned from major social media platforms just a while ago. Same things with discussions about masks. And now we're having major studies talk about the harmful effect of lockdowns, that lockdowns actually have not done any good. They've really only done harm during this pandemic. Yet if you had said that at certain points early on, you would have been banned again. So, who is it that wins in a case of censorship. The only ones that I could see are the ones who want to get away with lies, right? Because they say that they're concerned about misinformation, but the only thing that really is protected when you censor is the process by which you can identify what's a lie and what's truth. So it's really those who want to get away with misinformation who arguably are helped by a policy against misinformation, something that's going to censor misinformation, because that process of correcting your beliefs in accordance with the truth is completely hampered. It's cut off.
Amy Peacock from Parler, thanks so much for your time. And I do wonder whether Spotify would have been quite so keen to retain Joe Rogan had they not just signed, what was it, a $100 million deal with him? A question for another time, perhaps. Amy, thanks very much indeed. Rolling your eyes as well, you might. We're going to go back to Kiev. And there we see the camera set up for this press conference in the Ukrainian capital. We are going to go over there now. Let's listen.
Is that the president?
That is President Zelensky still speaking, as they want to do, Kate Hoey, sometimes foreign leaders. Kate Hoey's alongside me, Baroness Hoey, long-time Brexiteer and an observer of the vagaries of live television.
Very interesting and very professional how it's all handled. No, I mean, the Spotify thing, by the way, is, I mean, when I say I don't know much about Spotify, I think they're absolutely right to stick by Rogan, whatever he said. I mean, we've got to keep freedom of speech. Here we are.
Okay, thanks for stopping. Here's Boris
Britain and Northern Ireland.
Thank you very much, President Zelensky. Thank you, Volodymyr. Thank you for welcoming us all to your magnificent Mariinsky Palace here. That's absolutely fantastic to be back in Kiev and to see the excitement, the buzz of this capital, which has changed a lot. And I must say, since I was last here 5 years ago, I think, and in many interesting and positive ways. But we have to face a grim reality, which is that as we stand here, Volodymyr, today more than 100,000 Russian troops are gathering on your border in perhaps the biggest demonstration of hostility towards Ukraine in our lifetimes. And the potential deployment dwarfs the 30,000 troops that Russia sent to invade Crimea in 2014. Since that time, of course, as everybody knows, 13,000 Ukrainians have been killed, and Ukraine has been plunged into nearly a decade of war. It goes without saying that a further Russian invasion of Ukraine would be a political disaster, a humanitarian disaster. In my view, it would also be, for Russia, for the world, a military disaster as well. And the potential invasion completely flies in the face of President Putin's claims to be acting in the interests of the Ukrainian people. The UK and other countries will be judged by the people of Ukraine and the world on how we respond and how we help. Since 2015, the UK has trained over 22,000 Ukrainian military personnel and provided £2.2 million worth of non-lethal military equipment to Ukraine. 2 weeks ago, we sent anti-tank weaponry to strengthen Ukraine's defences further. And today, I've announced a further £88 million of UK funding to support good governance and energy independence in Ukraine. This will bolster your efforts, Volodymyr, and those of others, to build a free and prosperous Ukrainian society free of malign influences. Alongside other countries, we are also preparing a package of sanctions and other measures to be enacted the moment the first Russian tow cap crosses further into Ukrainian territory. And we have done all this and prepared all this, not as a show of hostility towards Russia, but as a demonstration that we will always stand up for freedom and democracy and Ukrainian sovereignty in the face of aggression. In recent days, I've spoken to the leaders of the United States, France, Germany, Italy, the NATO Secretary General, and others. All agree on the fundamental importance of supporting Ukraine's self-determination. Because the people of Ukraine have the inalienable right to choose how they are governed and, indeed, which organisations they aspire to join. And as your friend and partner, the UK will always uphold that right. It is vital that Russia steps back and chooses a path of diplomacy, and I believe that is still possible. We are keen to engage in dialogue. Of course we are, but we have the sanctions ready, we're providing military support, and we will also intensify our economic cooperation, because we are a firm and enduring ally of Ukraine and a supporter of Ukraine's territorial sovereignty and integrity. Thank you all very much.
Дякую, шановні колеги, журналісти, пан президент, пан прем'єр-міністр готові відповісти на кілька запитань. BBC, будь ласка. Just wait for your mic.
Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Questions from the
Prime
BBC.
Minister
Let's
first.
listen.
Have you done enough to survive? Have you done enough to persuade enough colleagues to rescue your premiership? And on the issue of Ukraine, why should the international community take your diplomacy seriously when you're so preoccupied at home, when you put talking to MPs ahead of talking to President Putin? And Mr. President, if I ask, do you believe that the Prime Minister and his American allies are exaggerating the threat from Russia? And can you also tell us more about this new tripartite relationship between Ukraine, the UK and Poland? Thank you.
Let me go first, James, and just say that my focus is entirely on delivering on the priorities of the British people, and they include ensuring that we are secure in our relations with our friends and allies, and that our friends and allies are secure. And I think there's a great deal of concern in our country about what we're seeing on the border with Ukraine, and it's absolutely vital that the UK government should step up now, bring together our friends and partners in the West in the way that we are, prepare the package of economic sanctions that we have, and as you know, we've intensified them now, and the package that we're bringing forward, the new legislation, will enable us to pinpoint commercial interests of Russia, strategic commercial interests of Russia in a very direct way, as well as individual Russian commercial interests. And I think it's vital that in Moscow they understand that there will be automaticity in the way that we apply these sanctions, so that the minute there is a further incursion into sovereign Ukrainian territory, then those sanctions will apply. And I know that that's also the position of our American allies, and what we're hoping is that it will be the general position, and that's what we're working to achieve. But we're also doing what we can to strengthen Ukraine's ability to resist, and that's why we sent the 2,000 anti-tank weapons. That's why we're continuing with training under Operation Orbital and have sent more troops out to that end. But I think perhaps the single most useful thing we can all do is get over to the Russian public, to citizens in Russia thinking about this possibility, the reality that the Ukrainian army will fight. And there are 200,000 men and women under arms in Ukraine. They will put up a very, very fierce and bloody resistance. And I think that parents, mothers in Russia should reflect on that fact. And I hope very much that President Putin steps back from the path of conflict, and that we engage in dialogue. And that is what the UK is intent on producing, and that's why I'm here today.
Дякую за запитання. Я, по-перше, дуже коротко відповім щодо...
So Boris Johnson making it very clear there that he hopes President Putin, quote, steps back. As you just heard him say there, the understanding is that the message that he wants the Russian people to take away from developments is that the Ukrainian army, which is more than 200,000 men and women in arms, is ready to fight. And sanctions, he said, would be applied with a typically rhetorical flourish, would be applied on the Russian regime the moment a single Russian toe cap crossed the border with Ukraine. We're going to keep across that press conference. As soon as the Prime Minister comes back into view and speaks in English, we'll go back to it. Kate Hoey, Baroness Hoey, who's worked with the Prime Minister in the cause of Brexit over many years, to reflect, I think, a little bit on Ukraine. And the key question that people have, and we're not foreign policy experts, is how serious is this? The Prime Minister clearly is of the view this is serious. War is looming, or maybe looming. There are other people who say we're making too much of it.
No, well, I don't think he's making too much of it. And I think even before, the people who say it's a diversion, I think, are being very cynical. But I think what we need to remember is the importance of our Prime Minister coming to Ukraine, speaking in Kiev. That will be very big news in Ukraine. And that's giving a huge amount of support and succour to people there who probably are feeling slightly hemmed in by what's happening. And so, just because the Prime Minister is under a lot of attack in the United Kingdom, I don't think we should think that his presence there is not quite a symbol of our support and a symbol of the West generally supporting Ukraine in any Russian aggression. So I think we can look at it like that. And that's probably the best thing that will come out of this, because he's not really said anything particularly new, reiterated support for dialogue and all of that, but nothing concrete.
As a Brexiteer, you must look, if nothing else, at the situation in Ukraine and see the wisdom of that old dictum that used to come from Washington, which is, in a crisis, who do you call in Brussels? There is no central figure that you can call, and that is one of the problems. And also we've seen, have we not, in recent weeks, this idea that, Germany, I'm going to phrase this carefully, Germany is not the reliable partner that you might have wished for. They're in hock when it comes to gas, for instance.
Yes, I think you're right. And I think, but remember that we still, people still look to the United States as the great leader of the free world. I mean, it's not quite so necessarily that at the moment with their current president, the way he's behaving on this issue. But I think that, the idea that somehow there was that when we were in the EU, that was going to make the way that we behaved, or that the EU behaved, any different. I mean, we were always fighting battles to try and get the EU to do things that we thought were right. And obviously, lots of times we were literally outvoted. So I think actually we have more power now and credence because we are an independent country that can actually make its own decisions without the time length that it took to take decisions in the European Union. We saw that with vaccination.
Let's just show our viewers, and sorry if you're listening on radio, we'll try and paint a picture for you, the situation in Kiev right now, the scene there with the Prime Minister flanked by the President of Ukraine, Zelensky, who is addressing at length the journalists who've gathered there. As soon as the Prime Minister starts talking again, we will zip back to that. As you look at those pictures and listen to those words, let's turn to Zoltan Kovacs, who's the Secretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Relations for Hungary, the state of Hungary. Worth mentioning that Viktor Orban, leader of Hungary, met with Vladimir Putin earlier this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us, Zoltan Kovacs. Really appreciate your time. Just reflect, and I do apologise if we have to dip out to go back to our Prime Minister, but just reflect on this point. Hungary shares a border with Ukraine, and I know for your 100,000 or so ethnic Hungarians in Ukraine, you've had problems with what you consider to be heavy-handedness by Kiev. This isn't a story that will be familiar to many UK viewers. Just fill us in.
Well, the very complex and complicated history of Central Europe is indeed rightly coming into the picture, because as the old Hungarian kingdom, known until the end of the First World War, was dismembered, lots of millions of ethnic Hungarians found themselves on the other side of the border. And following the Second World War, over 100,000 of them has come to the Soviet Union, and then later, at the fall of the Soviet Union, came part of the Ukrainian Republic. So this is a historical hardship we are facing for those ethnicities, not only Hungarians, but many other ethnic groups in Central Europe. And indeed, for the past couple of years, especially, those Hungarians were not handled with care by the Ukrainians. We don't believe that that history, I mean the recent history, how they handled the Hungarian minority in the Carpatho Ukraine, is going to help the Hungarian-Ukrainian relationship. But at the same time, we got to assert you, as the Prime Minister put it this afternoon, that nobody's interest, including Hungary, is to have any kind of war or violent conflict in our neighborhood.
Because it would, you know, you are in the neighbourhood, you do share a border, Secretary of State. I mean, heaven forfend, if we do see conflict in Ukraine, there will be refugees, there will be people fleeing a war-torn country, and that will be something that neighbouring countries, including Hungary, would have to deal with. Just on the point about those ethnic Hungarians in the west of the country, does it give you an understanding, a sympathy with the situation faced by ethnic Russians in the east of the country that perhaps we here in the UK don't understand?
Well, the historical lessons we've learned for the past over 100 years by now is indeed the sympathy we should have towards all ethnic minorities who live under some kind of oppression or are not being handled according to the European standards. And this is the only thing actually we've asked from the Ukraine, and that is guarantee the same rights that are being provided for ethnic minorities in the European Union. That wouldn't be a problem. We can understand that the Ukrainian state has a problem with Russian minorities, but because of the very common history, the shared history of Russians and Ukrainians, that shouldn't be a problem either. It all became part of a larger political game in which lots of other concerns, lots of other aspects, strategic interests has come at stake, as you hear it from the press conference you are running in the background, as well as it was an element actually of discussions today between our Prime Minister and Vladimir Putin.
Secretary of State, is your country expecting war in Ukraine?
No, we don't. As a matter of fact, we do our best to avoid the escalation of the crisis. I believe the Prime Minister's words, as well as our Foreign Minister's words for the past couple of days, including today, this morning, where they have a bilateral meeting with the Russian Foreign Minister, is very simple. Whenever there was a war between the larger powers of Europe, especially between Russia and the western part of Europe, or say the Second World War, or including not the armed conflict, but the, if you like, the ideological conflict of the Cold War, the Central European countries, including Hungary, has always suffered. So our best interest is that we maintain peace. And as the Prime Minister put it this afternoon, his mission this occasion, this is the 12th occasion actually, he met Vladimir Putin.
Apologies, Secretary of State. Thanks very much. Going to go back to Kiev now.
Help draw a line underneath the saga by committing to publish the full Grey inquiry, including any of the 300 plus pictures she might submit, or you keep the public in the dark. And President Zelensky, what more do you want from the UK to help you fight Russian aggression? Would sanctions against Vladimir Putin personally be of help? And do you think the UK is doing enough to tackle dirty money from the Kremlin being laundered through the City of London?
Thank you very much. Yes, of course we'll publish everything that we can as soon as the process has been completed, as I said yesterday. And on your point about Vladimir Putin, and I think somebody asked a question earlier, I'll be talking to President Putin tomorrow. And somebody said, you know, were we exaggerating the the threat. Were the US and the UK in any way trying to big this up? And I've just got to say that is not the intelligence that we're seeing. This is a clear and present danger. And we see large numbers of troops massing. We see preparations for all kinds of operations that are consistent with an imminent military campaign. And the reason we think it's so important for the UK to take the role that we are in trying to bring the West together is because, yes, of course it's about Ukraine, and that matters deeply to us. But this is about something even bigger, I'm afraid. It's about the whole European security architecture. Because be in no doubt about what I think President Putin is trying to achieve here. I think that he is trying, by holding a gun, as it were, to the head of Ukraine, by intimidating Ukraine, to get us to change the way we look at something that was absolutely fantastic. When I was a young man, the Berlin Wall came down, we had the doctrine of a Europe whole and free. Any country could choose its independent, sovereign destiny in the whole of the European landmass. That was a fantastic thing. A fantastic thing. And I think what is happening now is that President Putin, Russia, is trying to undermine those immense gains and to redraw the security map of Europe and to impose a new Yalta, new zones of influence. And it wouldn't just be Ukraine that was drawn back into the Russian sphere of influence. You've got to think about Georgia, you've got to think about Moldova, other countries. And so this is absolutely critical, this moment. It's vital that we stand together with Ukraine in the way that we are. And that's why all the measures that the UK is putting in place, I think, are so important. That's why we'll continue to work very hard. But, you know, I've just got to repeat what I said. Our view is that time is urgent, and this is something that needs to be addressed now.
I'm sorry, would you mind repeating your question, the part that you addressed to Mr. President Zelensky?
I didn't hear the first part of the question, please.
I'm sorry, you spoke about sanctions and the sanctions Britain has warned. Do you think personal sanctions against Vladimir Putin could help fight Russian aggression? And do you think the UK is doing enough to tackle the dirty money linked to the Kremlin being washed through the City of London and banks?
We're back into Ukraine. As you look at those pictures, let's just talk about something else. We've been debating today to what extent this story is something that displaces all other stories. Is it something that means we don't talk about Boris's political woes or indeed anything else that's going on? One story that was around at the weekend that we've been keen to talk about, couldn't talk about it yesterday for obvious reasons, there was too much else going on, and that's some research by the Taxpayers Alliance, which has deduced that the lifetime tax liability for the average British household now is in excess of £1.1 million. John O'Connell is from the Taxpayers Alliance. And, John, this feeds into a conversation that the Conservative Party is having within its own membership about how much tax people should pay and whether this current government, with its highest tax burden in 71 years, is getting it right.
Yeah, absolutely. And, of course, that's crystallised with the debate on national insurance, and lots of Conservative MPs have been quite vocal in saying that the government shouldn't go ahead with that in April. And then, of course, over the weekend, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor jointly confirmed that they will go ahead with it. So our research looked at the amount of tax paid over a lifetime. The average household, as you said, Colin, can look to pay over £1 million over a lifetime in tax. And we're going to be adding to that burden, because then we can think about council tax going up in April. We can think about the thresholds at which you move up through the income tax bands being frozen, so people are going to be paying higher and higher taxes. So, and then, you know, employers won't get off lightly either. We're talking about employers, national insurance, corporation tax rates are going to go up. So, yeah, that tax burden's getting quite hefty.
Kate Hoey, when you were a young Labour activist, the talk was of squeezing the rich until the pips squeak.
Oh, a long time ago.
But nonetheless, I mean, I'd be curious as to know you stand on this.
Well, I do think that if we actually, I would much prefer us to being, you know, getting our industries going, more people employed, more people paying tax. And I just think if you grind people down with extra taxes all the time, and we've got to find a way, obviously, of dealing with some of the huge amounts of money that the COVID situation has caused. But, you know, just the easy solution of government always is to put up taxes, and the national insurance one in particular is, I think, a very regressive tax. I mean, it really is going to affect people who are earning much, much less. But I'm not sure what Labour would actually do. You probably know more about what Labour is saying than I do. I'm not.
Can we all agree on one idea before we take our viewers back to Kiev briefly? And that's this: that I think anybody who hits certain marks in terms of tax they've paid, £500,000, £1 million, the state's so ungrateful. A certificate. Thanks.
Oh, some notion of a thank you might be nice. Yeah, I mean, of course, and we're trying to deal with massive bills that have come out of the pandemic, of course, and there's two other ways that you can look at that. One is to control spending, because it's not just about income, it's about outgoings too, and the other is economic growth, and having a low tax, stable economy will drive growth in the longer term and bring in receipts to pay for our public services over the longer term.
And people need incentives to work, don't they? They want to work to get money. They don't want to work to get more of their money taken off them, and that's...
Yeah. I just want to show our viewers what's happening in Kiev right now. I think President Zelensky is still going.
He was getting very agitated there. I wonder what he was actually saying.
As you look at those pictures, let me just share one email who says, I would vote for Kate Hoey as Prime Minister. It's refreshing to have balanced and thoughtful responses to a variety of issues. Here's the Prime Minister.
We've recently done a deal for some minesweepers to help in Ukrainian borders as well.
Окей. Дуже дякую. Я просто хочу сказати, що питання розвинуто і...
I promise you I'll move heaven and earth to make sure the next time we do a foreign press conference we have translation available so we don't have to keep chopping and changing as we have to. But we want to bring what the Prime Minister's had to say there. We think it's important. And I'll just recap part of what his message was for the Russian leadership. And I'm not sure we entirely knew this today, did we, that he just said that there will be a conversation tomorrow with Vladimir Putin, talking to Putin tomorrow. You'll know that there was that scheduled telephone call yesterday, which didn't happen because the Prime Minister's appearance in response to the Sue Gray report overran, and instead Vladimir Putin, the Russian leader, had a conversation with Emmanuel Macron, which probably stuck in somebody's craw, I imagine. Some closing thoughts. John O'Connell's still here from the Taxpayers Alliance. He's made his point about taxes. I'm not sure what you've got to say about Anglo-Ukrainian affairs, so I'll turn to Kate Hoey instead to reflect on the Prime Minister's Partygate woes. We've been trying to address one question today, Kate, and it's simply this. Is the media overblowing Boris's domestic political woes around the Sue Gray report, partisan Downing Street, and does that mean we ignore the big stuff?
Well, we can't ignore what's happened in Downing Street, but I think looking at the Prime Minister today, he looked well, he looked better than he did certainly yesterday, he looked statesmanlike, and I think, that is what desperately the government want, to see him being able to go back and carry on with doing things. In the meantime, we wait for the police reports to come out, and let's get on, let's stop talking about it every single minute with every single MP who wants to say something, then getting, particularly if they're opposed to Boris, they do seem to get the headline.
I'll say thanks to Kate Hoey and John O'Connell for coming in. Thanks both very much indeed. And we'll end on those scenes from Kiev, the Prime Minister, flanked by the Ukrainian President there. And as you look at that and perhaps listen a little later on to what the Prime Minister's got to say, this from Colleen, who writes in to say, Partygate has been a huge distraction from the important business of government. Boris Johnson has presided, well, we haven't got time for the rest of that email, but you get the sense. More news coming up.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farrar, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation.